Please join me in welcoming Soledad O'Brien.
I began my career in television news in 1987. I had decided not to apply to medical school, and I was completely at a loss for what to do. And I started working at the local NBC station in Boston. It was about 4 miles away from my dorm room, and in the snow, I would literally curse under my breath as I would walk these 4 miles to get to this TV station. And you had to cross the Harvard soccer fields and lacrosse fields and actually climb under a fence to kind of do the shortcut to get to this TV station. And I used to think, I had better get a job out of this. Kind of worked out. I was, in my very first job there, the coffee fetcher. And to this day, if anybody needs anything, raise your hand, I'll get it to you. And then for a while, believe it or not, one of my jobs was to remove staples from the bulletin boards around the building. And people, there's no need to laugh, that's a job. Who do you think removes the staples around the building? My parents, who had spent just about $100,000 on my education at Harvard, to say they were dismayed doesn't even come close to how they felt. But I absolutely loved it because I loved being part of a team that was pulling together to put something on the air to do news. And I loved the production assistants who would sprint down the hallway holding tapes in order and take off their shoes so that they could make it in time to pop the tape in and hit play and make air. I had a boss who had some serious problems. He had 4 kids and a wife and a girlfriend. We used to work the overnight together, just the 2 of us in the building, and he literally would absolutely ignore me. It was the overnight shift, and he would come in and say hey, and then go and fall asleep on his couch. And we used to have this system in local news back then, which we had negotiated through our union contracts, which was if you were someone in an entry-level position like I was, and you had to go out and what they called get sound, do an interview, they had to pay you extra money if any body part was seen on camera. So for example, if your fingers were seen in the shot, that was $35. And if your voice was used in the interview, that was $25. And you could make your rent that way by doing a couple of things. Number one, asking only leading questions. So, Mr. Mayor, you believe this policy is? And the guy would have to answer as part of your question, and they would have to use your question, ergo $25. And then you'd hold the mic like this, as close as you could to the top, so that your fingertips would be in the shot, and they would have to make a true story. And that's how we all made our rent. I was hoping to apply for the next level of entry-level job, and so I sat in my boss's office, and I started listing all the interviews that I had done, what we called grabbing sound. You know, get a couple of quick sound bites from the mayor, get a couple of quick sound bites from somebody. And I'd done, probably by then, about 100 different interviews. And so I made a list of all these interviews that I had done because I felt that it was time for me to be promoted. And I had prepared all sorts of test questions with my boyfriend, who's now my husband. Anything, you know, sort of, what's your motivation for being here? What's your long-range goal? 5 years, 10 years? How do you feel about this? And we sat down, and my boss, who, as I mentioned, had some serious problems, asked me only one question, and it was one question that I was not prepared for, which was, who are you, and what do you do here? I couldn't answer that. So so much for getting a promotion. But eventually I did get promoted. Rather quickly I went from writer assistant to writer trainee to writer to associate producer and to producer. And after years of working really horrible hours, I made the move to go to NBC News. But I've always loved the opportunities that television news provided, which was to tell stories with great affection and great respect for people whose voices most often do not get heard, for people whose stories often go ignored, for people whose daily plight we may not know about. And to me, it really is about thinking differently about someone's story and maybe about what the solutions to the problems they elicit might be. And I'll give you some examples. I was talking to a woman who runs the UN food bank she was telling me all the problems they were having in some of their missions that they had in Africa, for example, where they found that once girls turn about 8 years old, nobody wants to send them to school. And 8-year-old girls become actually very valuable in the home, taking care of the smaller children. And this was a real problem for a couple of reasons. First, you had this large undereducated population, but also they knew from past experience that women stay, the girls stay in communities that they would serve. It was the girls who would stay in the community, and the men would marry and leave, go to their wives' communities, but the women would stay. And so if you really wanted to make a difference in a community, if you wanted to improve healthcare, you had to educate the women. If you wanted to improve agriculture, you had to educate the women. And so you could not have women, girls, not getting educated past 8 years old. It was just an impossible situation, both in the short term and in the long term. And she said the problem was the community just did not support getting these 8-year-old girls educated. And I said to her, wow, that just sounds like an impossible situation. How did you possibly turn it around? And she said, well, actually, we just thought differently about what the solution could be. She said it was quite simple. The first thing we did was to offer food to any child who came in to school. But we also sent every child home with food for their family. And almost immediately, it turned around. All those 8-year-old girls who were valuable at home suddenly became valuable as providers for the family. Their sort of position in the hierarchy changed overnight. They went from being non-valued members of society, being very valued. And their value flipped pretty much. The whole community was suddenly vested in getting not only these 8-year-old girls, but every child to be educated. It became a priority for the community. And of course, those girls who were getting educated as 8-year-olds would go on to be educated as 9-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and they would be the ones who would learn about techniques in healthcare and learn about techniques in agriculture that would help the community in the long run be more successful.